My father was a brick mason, and he had a reputation as one of the best bricklayers in South Carolina. I'm just so proud of him. But he supported 13 kids. I don't know if welfare ever came through my house, but my family suffered its share of deficits like, you know, most black people. I know of instances where men in my communities had to be hidden in the trunk of somebody's car and spirited out of town at night to keep them from being lynched. Okay, when I looked at that movie, and I don't even want to call the name of it because it leaves a bad taste in my mouth, but my mother worked as a domestic, so I know what the real relationship is between the white mistresses and the black help. And I think one of the most profound scenes of that movie is when this woman goes to her maid's house and she doesn't even know, number one, that this woman has children, and she couldn't tell you the name of this woman's child. So that, to me, says a lot about how deep was this relationship between these two people. But anyhow, the civil rights movement, I went to undergraduate at Voorhees College in Denmark, South Carolina. And during the spark which generated the civil rights movement, I marched and occupied a building on campus to promote civil rights. So I feel like, and I know you're not going to believe this, as young as I am, I feel like I've been in this a long time. And if you identify me as a fighting spirit, it is a gift that I got directly from my father, John Long. Thank you so much.
Wow.
They want to hear from you.
Totally unprepared. I didn't know that. My name is Sal Inglese, 86 years old. The paper said I'm a Navy veteran. I'm Army. I don't know where they got that. Maybe my son, Christopher. No. But anyway, I come from a long line. My father was an organizer for the International Ladies Garment Union back in the 20s and 30s. Wow. Imagine that. It's almost 100 years, right?
It's just a recording.
Huh?
It's just recording. It's not PA.
Oh yeah, we want to hear it though.
They want to hear it. They want you to put the microphone up, but if you can talk as loud as you can.
Loud as you
It'll
can.
help if you sit over there so you're upwind. Sorry.
Shall I repeat it?
Yeah.
You want that done? We can do that. Two people sit beside him. I know what he wants. Come on, let's show him.
Shall I repeat what I said?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, my name is Sal.
My name is Sal.
Well, you know, my name is Salvatore Santo Mariano Inglese, but Sal.
Okay, we're just going to hope that one works.
It does.
I used to counsel at-risk kids in Barnwell years ago.
I used to counsel at-risk kids in Barnwell years ago.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Yeah, I can hear it. We can hear it. You got it.
So when we got a new kid in the group, they'd say, "Hey, Doc, tell him your name. Tell him your name." So I would tell them my name, and they would laugh. They didn't know whether I was cursing, or they never heard a name like that in Barnwell. My mother was active. My sister just today said she put in the mail a picture of my mother 50 years ago riding from 2 busloads of active women from Miami to Tallahassee, Florida to meet the governor, to talk about civil rights and rising prices and all that. So, wow, great parents. In the 60s, I worked for a Catholic school, university in Boca Raton, Florida. And those sisters were so active in civil rights with African Americans and with the immigrants. And let me tell you about one of our sisters who taught sociology. Every year or every semester, she'd have this experiment. She'd have two groups. She'd have one group, she'd give them, I don't know, $20, $30 each, and one group went to Publix. Very, very big in Florida, all over, if you're from Florida. One went to the grocery store where the immigrants shopped. I'm not kidding you. When they came back and reported, like they had to buy certain things, sugar, bread, what's another staple, rice, flour. When those college kids compared prices, the people who shopped in the migrant stores paid more than the people who went to Publix. That's how they got screwed. I mean, come on. And I bet it happens now, too. I used to work up in North Carolina, way up, I don't know, North Carolina, Jefferson. A lot of migrants up there taking care of the Christmas trees. What do they call those Christmas trees? They only grow 3,000 feet up. Yeah. That's about it. I've always worked with minorities. I've always worked with Native Americans in Florida. I retired from South Carolina State University in Orangeburg after 14 years, only because I had cancer, and they gave me 5 years to live. But here I am. That was 20 years ago. So, so whatever we can do, I'm proud of my two sons. Chris, you probably know Chris Inglese, and Mario. And my other son's teaching in Korea, and my little girl, she's teaching. She was 5 years in the Peace Corps, and now she's teaching in Morocco. Very liberal. Thank you. What a liberal country, liberal Arab country Morocco is. They have a great big Catholic cathedral, they have a Protestant church, they even have a synagogue in a Muslim country. It's great, you can wear a cross. I can't do that in Saudi Arabia or Iran. See, they put you in jail, right? Don't tell Chris, but 2 years ago we went there, and he was introduced to this Muslim girl at university, and he went out with her a lot. We were there for 3 weeks, and he got caught kissing her in the park, and he got fined $10. I said, boy, you're lucky this wasn't Saudi Arabia. You big I would have chopped your head off. But what?
And she would have been stoned.
And she would have been stoned. Thank you. I mean, it's terrible. They believe in the honor killing. Isn't that sad? If a girl, not a guy, if a girl had sex outside of marriage, they believe in killing her. Anyway, don't read anybody.
Not that we would. None of us. No.
Anyway, that's about it. I mean, I don't want to go on.
This is my, I think I'm older than Gwen, so I probably was around longer than Gwen. And while I was born in North Charleston, I didn't actually live in Charleston for a long period of time until 1971. And when I came in 71, we had those civil rights workers like Reverend Dawson and Newman and some of those guys. So I am one of those students of that movement. I was born in 1949, so at the first grade level, I was right there with the Brown versus the Board of Education. I lived out in Hugie at that time. You all know that big metropolis out there on the outside of Mount Pleasant, where there's no stop sign, no stop lights. Well, I grew up out there, and I remember my first year in school, we had a one-room schoolhouse, where we actually walked to school for a couple of miles, and when we got there, we had to pick up the pine cones to start the fire. And this was about the time when the state of South Carolina was just fighting this integration so badly that they wanted to build schools for the black kids to keep the kids from being integrated with the white kids. So we got what I call the shell of a school that was built out there. So in 1954,
We went into our first school, Canhoy School, out in Eugene. That's still there, no longer high school, but it is my alma mater. I am one of those people that pick cotton. I'm one of those ones that came through at a time when I remember where the signs are saying colors were on the back. And when you get on the bus in North Charleston, you get in through the front so you can pay. But you had to pass that little line and go in the back. So I remember all of that. I think sometimes my passion about what I do with the NAACP has much to do about seeing where we've come, but still are reminded of how much farther we need to go. And when we have issues like we have now, even in the city that I live in, where we have profiling issues and different issues, and here I'm at this point with a 15-year-old grandson, and I'm saying some of the things that you're going to be judged by simply because of the color of your skin, we're still dealing with that. And those things drive me really passionately to make sure. We had a conversation just recently, I think just after the first break, and we were talking about some of the issue with the immigrations and how people are being treated. And my passion goes beyond, and I think this is contrary to what people really believe about the NAACP, at least about the time my 10 years with the NAACP, which has been the last 10 years, that it doesn't matter to me what color the person is if they've got a problem. And I think I've proven that time and time again, and there are enough people who knows me enough to know that's the case. Because I remember with some Latino folks, and that's why I think when we look at this immigration issue and see who really benefits from it, we need to really look at things with open eyes. There was this group of Latinos who had been hired by Beasler Homes, but the contractors, they had hired these people to paint about 10, 14 houses. These guys painted the houses, and when it's time to collect, here was a subcontractor telling them, you know, we don't have the papers we need to pay you. Now, the papers, they needed some papers, they said. And whatever papers they wanted, I reminded them that what they didn't have at the time they hired them, they weren't going to have them now. And then by a couple of days later, we were able to get the money for those folks. And I've had the same things with Orientals that have had problems in North Charleston. I've had it with white folks. I've had it with integrated people who are married in marriages that are integrated. So it comes across all lines why we do what we do. So I think some of those folks that have gone before us, it's incumbent upon us to remind ourselves that yes, and I think somebody was telling me before about I got a call. We get these anonymous calls, y'all, in the morning, and I love these people. They call and leave us messages. This is what you need to look at. And this guy called and told me, he said, you know, my grandmother, and he was a white gentleman, he said, my grandmother used to do this and to work with the NAACP. I said, you don't have to tell me about what the white folks did with the NAACP, because if it wasn't for Ms. Overton and some of these other people, the NAACP probably would not exist. So we're mindful and we're very cognizant of the fact that we need all of us to realize that we're in the same boat. I mean, we're in the same boat. And there's some folks might say, you know, I might look different in the boat than you do, but if this boat go down, it doesn't care what color we are. We're going down together. You understand? So I'm pleased to be out here again. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to even share with you, because sometimes what's printed out there, and let me just say this, all the things they say I say in the paper, y'all, I don't say all of that stuff. I don't say those things, all of those things. But you know what? It's almost like you need the media and you wish you didn't. So I just want y'all to know that if something comes up and he said, you know, the NAACP president said this and I think that's a problem, please call me up and let me defend myself, because I didn't say all of that. I said most of it, but not all of it. But again, this is some serious times, some serious issues. Glad to be here, and thank you so much for being attentive to what I had to say.
Thanks for saying what you had, because, you know, I'm ashamed to admit I read the Post-Courier occasionally.
And you believe I said all that stuff, didn't you?
You can say that in there.
Come on.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, I have just heard this dear lady characterized by people as being a racist.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And I know people who work closely with you that I won't name who've always said otherwise, but that characterization has been perpetrated.
Yeah, on me, and people believe
And I
it.
am so glad to hear you say, well, I don't know, hopefully not, but
Yeah, well,
but
it's not, but you know, it's easy when people want to believe the bad things.
I think what our being here demonstrates is that we've got a lot more in common than we are different, and we need to keep focused on that. And other important thing is, as long as significant groups of this economy are disenfranchised, then I guarantee you it has a negative impact on everybody. It's like the educational system. For the longest time, South Carolina has been committed to dual education. Well, unless you're committed to a parity education for all of your students, you're going to end up at the bottom of the list like South Carolina always does. You can't split it in half. You're going to have to do it across the board.
When I was growing up, we used to say, thank God for Mississippi.
Yeah.
Because they always rank beneath us.
And we're still down there at the bottom of the heap.
But Mississippi's ahead of us now.
Exactly.
Anyone else?
You young people can say something if you want.
You don't have questions? This is these practical questions.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be broad philosophical stuff. What worked, what didn't is a perfect. What is the best way to get someone involved in a movement?
There we go.
Well, that was a question for you.
For me,
There we go.
well, I think the best way to get people involved in the movement is to show them in as many ways as you can how they're impacted by the movement, and to try and attack apathy where it exists. You know, we as Americans kind of have this this approach where we assume somebody else is going to do the job, where we assume that, well, it's not really as bad as it looks. Usually if it looks bad, it is. You know, and if it starts to stink after 3 days, it's going to get stinker. So just talk to people and let them know how they're impacted. Be prepared to answer as many of their questions as you can. Provide them information where things that they can do, you know, signing up, participating, those kinds of things. But most of all, voting. I can't say it too much. Vote, 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 vote.
Nice.
I have a question. After this 99 hours is over, are we going to continue some type of other Occupy, or are we going to do anything else?
Well, the easiest answer to that question is I'm sorry. The easiest answer to that question is, A, the world will still be messed up on Sunday afternoon, even if we do a great job. There are three things we need to bear in mind. The first is that we're doing a whole day of these teach-ins today, which I've organized. But I didn't organize tomorrow or Saturday or Sunday. People sitting here need to look at the resources you have in this camp, the people you can get down here, and do some more sessions. Now, you may not need to do wall-to-wall all day, but we should continue this type of discussion here on the weekend, because there are people coming, y'all. I don't know if you've been watching Twitter. I don't know if you've been watching Facebook, but there are people on their way. They're at work right now, but they're coming Friday night. And we need to have things for them to do on Saturday that are meaningful, because we need to continue through the whole 99 hours here. Now, after that, we're not alone. There are 100 people holding down a camp on the State House grounds in Columbia. Now, holding an indefinite encampment in 2 cities in South Carolina would be a massive strain on the resources we have now. Now, you want to push and you want to stretch, but you don't want to snap and you don't want to squash.
So maybe some of us, if we're still interested in doing it, could go to Columbia and continue with the movement up there.
Yeah, and you can go up for a few days, you can go up for a week, or you can camp out till February.
How long have they been in Columbia?
Yeah, they've been up there.
A week.
The paper said that
We go 4 days when we started.
here was going to meet up with the movement in Columbia.
It's certainly likely to happen. Then the third thing is, after this ends, we'll probably have another GA meeting before this ends. We'll need to figure that out. And we can hold meetings and we can talk. My personal feeling is that we need to hold an indoor occupation in the miserable wet weather of January, a couple of weeks into January. We need to find a big building like the ILA Hall, and we need to occupy that for a full weekend and work out a big plan. So that when the weather gets decent, we'll be outside making noise. But we don't know what the world's going to look like, y'all. I mean, this isn't just our personal problem here today. Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Italy, and Greece are teetering on the verge of economic collapse. So, I can't tell you exactly what we need to do in April. Now, 20 years ago, I could have told you what to do in April, because the world was the kind of place where you could predict that. But, this is something that we will have to make up as we go along. But the first thing we need to make up is what's going to happen in this tent tomorrow.
I had a question for some of those of you who were on the lines in the civil rights movement of the 60s. I know that you marched and marched because I was alive then too. I was a little bit younger and I watched it, but I watched it on TV. And you marched and marched and it seemed like nothing was ever going to happen. But things finally did happen. Not everything that needed to happen happened. We're still fighting a lot of those fights. But things changed. We had change. What kind of hope can you give us in this movement? If this movement, I hope, will grow, what can we accomplish? What kind of hope can you give us? What do we have to do to stick with it, to inspire people to stick with it until something really great happens?
I would think if we look back at when the banks got their stimulus, and how quickly they went back to not just business as usual, but even worse performances, more corporate greed, less concern about how you and I and ordinary citizens are impacted by this whole economic system. If we use that time span as a reminder of whether we can make this a one-time good thing, we know it has to be sustained. But I think what the civil rights movements demonstrates that, if anything, when you start off with the will, when you start off with the hope, you don't need any weapons. You can deal with dogs. You can deal with fire hoses. You can deal with police brutality. All of those things. But if you maintain that sustained hope, then look at where I am now versus where I was 60 years ago, where black people were 100 years ago. So I think if this movement needs any kind of strength, they can certainly find it in the civil rights movement.
I have a question for the people like yourself that were in the civil rights movement. At that time, I was explaining to someone today that I'm not anti-government and I'm not really anti-big business or anti-people. I'm kind of like tightrope. I say good for people, good for business, good for the country. Just need balance. How to achieve that, I guess, is the $64 million question. At your time when you were standing for civil rights, were you standing so much for civil rights or unity, or were you standing against discrimination, or were you doing a little bit of both? And is standing for something, is that's what helped you with the longevity? Is that's what helped you going, or is it because you stood against something that helped you sustain this length of time?
I don't know that the objective was necessarily esoteric. I think the objective was a lot more practical. As Dot said, I went to a one-room school, and as we're walking to school, we're passed by the school bus with the white kids on it, and some of them are throwing things out of the window and spitting at us, and the bus driver is driving through a mud puddle so that we can get splashed. So what the objective is under conditions like that is certainly not symbolic. You want to see some changes that impact you personally.
No, you got to do self-preservation, obviously.
Right. It's survival.
Did you stand for unity, or did you stand against discrimination?
Well, I think the one thing any people, and we're famous in this country with labels. And I'm not all that big on labels, but I think if you look at situations and conditions, and when you realize how things impact you, and I think the fight had a lot to do with more practical applications of changing things that make a difference for me and make a difference for the people that I love and the people in my neighborhood and the people across the street from me. Not so much symbology. I think maybe the symbology comes later.
Stood for unity. You didn't stand against discrimination. It sounds like, practically speaking, well, hell, I had to keep duck from the rocks and the sticks and the stones and whatnot, practically speaking. But when I chose to stand up and speak, or just to stand up and, I chose for a positive reason. And I think that's honestly what I was getting at, is I think that's what's been to sustain such a movement for so long. 30 years, 40 years, you would have had to have stood for something positive. Obviously, you had to dodge the bullets and the hoses and dogs and everything else. But once you had to stand for something, I think you probably stood for something, and I think that would be a good place to begin. Generally speaking, that we need to stand not necessarily against corporations, not necessarily against government, and not necessarily against 1% of the population. You have to find something to stand for. You have to stand for something. Obviously, if they're going to turn the dogs on me, I'm ducking and running. But until then, I'm going to find something that I say a good government, a good people, and I believe people are good. I believe government can be good, and I believe whatever our churches and our government are the three entities. What is it?
Can I just hold on to this mic a little bit?
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to say this because, in all honesty, I hear what you're saying, and I really understand what you're saying. But it's like me getting in a fight. Now, you could be offensive all you want, but sometimes you got to be defensive. So while we can stand for what is wrong, and we can also stand we can stand for what is right, we can stand against what is wrong. So I think if you say, well, you know what, I think Dr. King kind of done it somewhat what he says, nonviolent. But after a while, then, I'm not supporting you doing what I'm doing. I'm standing against what you're doing to me wrong while I'm supporting what I'm doing right. So sometimes you just can't just stand them. I'm throwing licks, but I'm not protecting myself. So you have to be defensive as well. That's all I want to say.
So what's been your sustaining force?
Well, us, the fortitude to want to do better. It's like a drowning man. I don't care until the last breath out of it. That's what
better day.
No,
there's a better day around.
And that should have been kind of obvious. That's the kind of stuff that said, until you walk in my shoes with these same heel on, I don't mean flat. You don't understand that. And I tell folks, I have no problem, like people say, when folks talk, I have no problem being really candid about it, because it's easy for folks who hadn't been there to tell you how you, don't tell me how to do something you hadn't done. It's like somebody who never gave birth telling us women about giving birth. You don't really understand. Well, we appreciate that. I think that we do need to also understand that we have to understand that there is this time when you not only have to be offensive, but you got to be defensive. So
unless you want to be a martyr.
Yeah, well, we don't want to care about that. I'm not so quickly, like King said, longevity has his place.
So he must have stood for something. He just didn't stand against big government. He just didn't stand against it.
But I don't.
There you go. That's what kept his longevity going. He stood for something, not against something.
I'm trying to figure out why are we having a discussion about what King stood for. Isn't that obvious?
He stood for something. He didn't stand against something.
Well, hey, I feel like some of the I feel what's going on is we're talking about the sustainability of this movement, and I feel as long as people are being kicked out of their house or thrown out of their homes, people are drowning in debt, people are having the issues that we're facing in this country, there is going to be a sustained movement because.
What a way to sustain a movement, make more persecute more people so you can get
Well, the more people you persecute, the more that will join our cause.
Yeah, well, I guess so. My observation was
We
that
tried it at work. We tried it at work. Go ahead.
Thank you.
my observation was, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm almost 70, and I tell you when the change happened, the change, and this is not going to be a popular statement here, but the change happened when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the reason Lyndon Johnson signed that act didn't have anything to do with the goodness of his heart. He did it politically, but in response to violence, because it was when Watts was burning. Okay, it's when LA was on fire and Detroit was on fire and DC was on fire that the moderate politicians signed the Civil Rights Act and those acts that followed that affected change. Now the path had been paved by nonviolence.
We are the beneficiaries of it.
Right, Ralph Abernathy is sort of
But you know what I think you might be missing, sir, is that Martin Luther King, before he was assassinated, was working for economic and political change. And he knew the only way to do it was through government. So government is, I mean, you know, he was marching with those people, those sanitary workers, so that some economic change could take place.
Yeah, well, I started my own corporation. I changed my name. I take responsibility for those things, and I did that on a personal and business level.
I think
anyone in this country, that's about the only freedom we've got left, is to change your name and start a corporation.
I think what I'm hearing, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but this is not, or I'm not here from the aspect of anti-government. I'm not anti-government. I'm not even anti-big business. I think what this movement says to me is a communication to those entities that we can coexist without one or the other sucking the value out of everything else. I am certainly not anti-government, but I think there have been some components of our government who have their own agenda, an agenda that appears to have nothing to do with responsiveness to their constituents. And I think these kinds of initiatives send a message to them that they need to get it together, but I don't see this as an anti-government initiative, nor an anti-corporate America initiative. I just need corporate America to stop sucking money out of my pocket.
I'd like to say that there's a difference between capitalism and corporatism. And that I'm not against capitalism. I'm not against anybody being able to start up their own business. I believe in that. What I'm against is the corporate run of our government. I'm against them being able to buy our politicians, to influence our politicians through lobbyists. I think that we need to amend the Constitution to strip corporations of their personhood. I think, and you can do that at movetoamend.org, or you can do it at getthemoneyout.org. You can sign those petitions. We also need to have campaign finance reform so that more than just two parties can run to begin with. We need to have us paying for the politicians, us paying for their campaigns. You can give if you want to, but like no more than say $1,000 per person. We've got to have campaign finance reform, and we've got to get corporations stripped of personhood.
And get the tax out of business.
And I agree 100%, but how are we going to do that? Constitutional amendment is the only way, because the Supreme Court decided last year that there will be no limits. And the government is owned by politics.
Right, there's no doubt about it. All of them.
And it's not all corporate interests. I mean, it is by lobbyists of every ilk. But without a constitutional amendment, it cannot be changed.
So we have to all, please, everybody who's here, if you believe what I've said, and you believe that we need to have our politicians in our pockets, not in BP's pockets, but in ours, please go to those two websites, sign those petitions, and let's please try to get this passed.
MoveOn.org.
Move to amend.org and get the money out.org.
I think too many people have bought into Reagan's philosophy. Government is the problem. Whoa, we need a strong government. We need Food and Drug Administration. I mean, what was that pill 30 years ago where women were giving birth to?
Yeah, deformed babies.
Thalidomide, thank you. Vioxx. I mean, of course we need a strong, but we need government oversight. Let me tell you, I was a school dropout, got false teeth. So I went in the Army, and I got malaria in Africa during the World War II. And so the government paid for my whole education. I got a doctorate. Now, I could have worked for minimum wage as a school dropout, paid no taxes, but I got good jobs. I was a principal, I was a professor, and I paid taxes. See what I'm trying to get? Get a sign. I see these people like, tax me. In other words, get me, pay me enough so that I pay taxes. You know, this woman wrote a book, Nickel and Dimed in America. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Yeah. Good book.
She worked at 4 places, including Walmart, for minimum wage, and then she wrote about it. You can't live on a minimum wage. We need a living wage. So, and look, United States is the only country in the world, check me on that, where you can go bankrupt because of medical bills. You can't do that in Europe, Japan, Australia. No, Canada can't do it. We're the only country. And there are only like a half a dozen countries who have a wider discrepancy between the millionaires and the poor. Europe doesn't have it.
Well, I think I know what I'm going to stand for.
Okay.
Since we're going to have all these disenfranchised people out of work, I propose that the full moon closest to the Saturday, we get together for a day of 99-cent trades. And anything under 99-cent trades, the government cannot tax you on. So all you have to do is bring a product or a service. And if you have both, you get $1.99. And since we're both wholesalers, we can pledge a little and we get about $5 a trade. So you're going to have a bunch of disenfranchised people with nothing to do with a bunch of time other times. Might as well just, learn a trade. Trade, and then trade on the down low, and you can take government and big business out in one swoop.
Y'all want to take a little music break now?
Yeah, we got you. You're not keeping that away from me.